Hey, everybody, we're here with another Savage Gentleman podcast. And tonight, my guest is none other than Rob the Fireman, as some may know him. And this gentleman, you may have seen if you actually took the time to watch The Last Ninja. No, I'm sorry, they changed the name. It's actually The Ultimate Ninja Challenge.
The
Um,
ultimate challenge.
which is how I met Rob and heard some of his story, which is absolutely fascinating. And man, Rob does a lot of cool stuff, and we're going to talk about that. But Rob, thanks for coming on, buddy. We're talking remotely. This is a first for us. Um, One thing, good or bad, we never do the same thing twice here with this podcast. Um, we are consistently inconsistent. Across the board. So just when you think you like something, we're going to change it up on you. And sorry, but anyway, Rob's here, and we're going to talk about some stuff, man. How you been, Rob?
I've been good. I've been good. This is great to be on here. I love the platform. I love the aspect of motivating men to get out there and be that savage gentleman that has kind of been lost. And I think being on that show with you, I found a different side of me that I never found before. So
Yeah, dude, it was really cool, man. It was awesome to get to know you on that. And honestly, dude, we're just trying to be more like you, man. I think, uh, as we get into some of the things that you're into, I mean, as a fireman, as a profession, right, which is
right.
pretty freaking, pretty manly and badass, right? But then not only is that your profession, but you also are a competitive triathlete, a competitive Ironman, ultra distance type guy. And if that wasn't hard enough, you do those events in your fireman kit, which we all know is not super conducive for moving
No,
around for long periods with any type of speed. And
no.
yet, unless you're you, and then somehow you could pull that off because you've got a Guinness World Record, right?
Yeah, I was for the number of Ironman 70.3, so it's a 1.2 mile swim,
Okay.
56-mile bike, and then it's a leisurely 13.1 miles in my 50 pounds of fire gear. And I
Whoa.
did 23 of those in 1 year.
Wow, dude,
So
that is brutal. And now you're not swimming in the gear, right?
no, 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 that'd be I'm a good swimmer, but I think I'd drown if I did that.
A 50-pound, I could not imagine wearing that freaking suit and helmet and the whole gear. Like,
And it doesn't breathe in the heat. That's the thing is like, it's all conducive to keeping the heat from when you go into a fire, it's keeping the heat away from you so that you don't get burned. And
right?
when you're out in the elements, everything is enclosed, so it's just the capsule of the fire suit, so I don't have all the little layers on underneath,
Sure.
but it does not breathe at all.
So then it would be smart for you to do all of your events in the wintertime then, right?
That'd be
Is that a, is that a,
glorious,
is that a
except you
tactical
can't swim
advantage?
that well.
Well, there is that. Oh
The
man.
ice dives.
Yeah, that's a problem. Man, classic conundrum. So, so yeah, I mean that's a pretty lofty set of accomplishments. And of course, we can look behind you and see your all your medals and trophies of things, and um, quite a few. I mean, there's more than at
There's a
least
few.
there's more than seven for the people who are just listening who aren't watching. But yeah, I mean that you've done
It's good
this a
wallpaper.
time or two. Yeah, it's a nice decoration. It's
Yeah,
not too shabby. Everyone
yeah.
likes a medal and such. Um, well, let's. I mean, there's so many avenues. There's so many things we can talk about, and we didn't really flesh any of this out beforehand. I kind of wanted to be off the cuff, and we'll see where it takes us. And I think maybe the place to start would be, what got you into becoming a fireman to begin with, because I think that's kind of the foundation as we go through and tell your story. I think a lot of it is gonna hinge on that fact. So, was that something that as a kid you're like, I want to be a fireman, or did you learn that later on in life, or where did that come into play?
It kind of came on later in life because I initially went to college and I played college basketball and then I played water polo. Kind of two different weird sports, but and then I had no real clue of what I wanted to do. I was going to college and I didn't really have a path that I wanted to go down, and So firefighting kind of came into the mix of, I went to a fire academy and was like, I like this. I like this being part of, this camaraderie, this something that's super dynamic that every time you go to work, it's something different.
Mhm.
It's physical, it's emotional, everything that I loved about competitiveness was in the fire service, but it's put to that next level of life or death decisions.
Yeah, the stakes are considerably higher. You're not just, oh man, the game's on the line, the championships or whatever. It's like, hey man, like there are people in there. We got to get them out. We got to put this building. We got to put the wet stuff on the red stuff,
Yeah,
as you
exactly.
like to say. Um, or else things are going to be really bad really fast. And
Exactly.
so, I mean, I have a ton of respect for the guys that are willing to take that level of competitiveness to, or take their competitiveness to that next level, right? Because
Right.
it's one thing to play sports in college, it's another thing to play sports professionally, but at the end of the day, you're still playing a game. Like, even as a fighter, the repercussions are really not that high, if I have a bad day. If you're a
Yeah.
fireman and you have a bad day, man, there are severe consequences to that. And so for the people to willingly make that choice, man, that I think it's commendable, and I think a lot of you guys don't always get the respect you deserve for that.
And it's hard because it's, as a profession, and I start my 20th year in October, in the profession. And as you grow through the profession, it's interesting because, a lot of things that I do nowadays, and a lot of things that I'm combating nowadays. When you were young, you were full of piss and vinegar, and you
Yeah.
just wanted to run into every burning building, save every cat or turtle. It was
Oh, my
important.
hamster. Oh,
Exactly.
somebody
I
get
mean,
my
it,
hamster.
it didn't even matter what it was. It was something that you were just like, wanting to go in and do. And as you get longer in your career, everything weighs on you more. And you know that from the show, when we talked, is everything weighs on you mentally and physically. Like, my body isn't what it used to be. My mind is shot. It's everything is just multiplied. And so as a career, it's a fascinating career because there's so many dynamic things that can happen to you as you go through it. And I think, as it's a macho career, that's the one
Sure.
thing that we're talking about. It's, and as I'm only, I'm 41, but I'm an old man in the industry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that there's something to, that nugget of guys that have gone through and, are the old man in a profession where typically it's geared around younger folks. I think there's a lot to glean from that. Because, hey, whether we like to admit it or not, we're all getting older. You know what I mean? Some of
Right.
us who are listening are already there, and we're going to continue to get older until the day we die. And that's a hard thing to deal with, facing that mortality and the reality that, hey, man, the person that you thought you were is no longer who you are, good, bad, or whatever. And coping with that, I think, is really important. And some folks do it better than others. Some people can never come to grips with, like, hey man, I'm not that 20 something year old kid that could jump out of buildings and do all the crazy stuff that I could do. And I think that weighs, like you were saying, it can really weigh on us if we don't find a way to reconcile our expectations with our actual reality.
Oh,
um
completely. You said it so. I think you said it very well in in grasping the mortality. And when people hear mortality, they think death,
right.
but it's really the mortality of who you are at that moment. So, like me as a fireman, the mortality is going to be at a certain point, and I'm going to have to now turn to going, well, what's Rob going to do next? And
Yeah.
I think that is ultimately scary because identifying as, that strong individual, now you're retired or you're having to do something else because your body and your mind can't catch up with what you want to do.
Mhm.
That's a tough cycle to go down. And I think there's a lot of similarities in the military
Sure.
that, hard charging, you've got, the back of the person next to you, and you come home and it's not like that in society anymore. And so there's a
Yeah.
lot of similarities in that,
Mhm.
and it's finding that next. that's why I love what you're doing is because a lot of times we see you see a career as a fireman, and it's hard when you leave because what's my identity now?
Yeah. Yeah. And we struggle with this. I struggle with this. I mean, that was the whole, as we discussed, like that was the whole idea of me even coming on the show was trying to
Yep.
come to grips with, hey, I've been a fighter and a competitive athlete my entire life. I know at some point I'm no longer going to be able to do that. Then what? And then how do I define who I am if I'm no longer Josh the fighter? And I think a lot of guys go through that regardless of their profession and regardless of how intense that may or may not be, whether it's military or firefighting or whatever.
Right.
We all have to figure that out, and I think you know the ones who can very I don't know cleanly close that chapter and start another chapter
Right.
are the ones that are able to transition more successfully, right? And they can realize like, hey man, this isn't the end of my life,
Right.
right? This is just the mortality of this phase. This phase is over. Now I'm, starting a new chapter, or hell, I might be writing a completely new book, you
Right.
know? and
Exactly.
that's okay. And I think being able to let go of the old for the new um, is the real challenge because
Right.
again, and that was what I came to like it was way easier for me to just like cling to fighting because that's what I knew, right?
Right.
As opposed to let go of that and then move into this other thing, which is the world of small business and e-commerce and entrepreneurship and all this stuff. It's like, man, that's the unknown. Like it's pretty scary. We're
Yeah.
in
And
uncharted waters.
there's no win or loss column. And I think that's
No.
the hard thing with the competitiveness. You have the win, you loss column, you have your statistics, everything like that. Now you get into a chapter in your life where you go, well, what's a win? What's a
Yeah.
loss?
Mhm.
What the hell what am I moving forward for?
Yeah. And
That's yeah.
and that's the thing, right? There's so many ways to get lost or trapped along the way, right? There's so many ways that we can stumble because we don't know where we're going, right? And so it's great, and I've been pretty fortunate to align myself and be around guys that were able to make that transition, and so I could kind of see what they did, and learn some of the lessons, and then take that and apply it to myself. And I think,
Right.
as men, as we're getting to that age, and I think a lot of our listeners are probably either in that stage or have already gone through that stage. I think it's important that we find those people that we can, look to and for some advice or some inspiration or just to lean on and have someone to talk about it with. And that was what one of the things that was really cool about being on the show is, man, we had some really solid dudes.
Oh yeah.
We were all kind of going through that weird transition phase, and I think we were um, really pretty well able to help each other work through that, which was really cool,
That was
considering we were
yeah.
all strangers going into it.
And it was interesting because and I think one of the biggest things because I always look back on that and when everything is stripped away from you, when all the bullshit and all the crap that is normal in life is stripped away, like the social media and everything that kind of clouds the judgment,
Hmm.
and you have just honest conversation without the fear of recourse from your opinions. That's when you start to grow, and I think that's what we had talk around, after working our butts off the entire day and hoping that we didn't freeze at night and having no food, little water that tasted like crap because we had to freaking boil it all the time. We had nothing that was comfortable. And so we
Yeah.
were able to strip aside that comfort that we usually have in our home, and get to the real meat of what we needed. But how do you do that when you don't have an island to sit on for three
Yeah,
days?
right. And that is the hard part, right? Like how do we actively strip away all the superfluous nonsense, right? Because that's I mean,
Hmm.
our lives are filled with so much, random stuff. We're bombarded with it every day. How do we find ways to remove that to get to ultimately what's real? Because that's what we came to, right?
Right.
When we're out there,
Oh,
we're on this TV show doing the survival challenge. Um, up in British Columbia, right? We're out there for days on end, just trying to not die and not freeze to death. Um, all of a sudden, it becomes really clear the things that matter,
Right.
and it gives you a unique perspective that I think we all were able to bring back, and hopefully most of us are still kind of applying that to our day to day. I know, I still need a reminder every once in a while for the first few days, for the first few weeks, months being back.
Yeah.
It was still very fresh in my mind, and like, dude, I took nothing for granted,
Right.
like having and I'm sure you did as well,
Yeah,
having a warm
exactly.
bed, having your bed to sleep in, being able to get up, walk over to the bathroom, turn on a faucet and have water, go down the fridge, be able to see my wife and my kids, all these things that were
Hmm.
removed.
Yeah.
It was like, I can't believe, I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah.
It was this almost like being reborn, right, and getting given a second chance. Like everything was removed and stripped away, and it's like, I have it back now. Okay,
Yeah. How long
now
did
I'm
it
good.
take to get? It was funny because how long did it take to get back into the routine of not as being as thankful for that stuff? And
Yeah, I'd say within 6 months, a lot of that was lost.
isn't that
And
crazy? Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy. I mean, that long, that intense of an ordeal, and within a matter of months, you're right. You fall right back into the same old habits, and
Yep.
I'm getting frustrated and annoyed with stuff that again really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
And like I came back with so much like inner peace.
Yeah.
I was like, dude, like nothing will ever rattle my cage ever after this. And
Yep.
then all of a sudden I wake up and like, dude, I'm pissed off at my wife. Like, what happened? I was this freaking Zen master for a while, and
Exactly.
then it's gone. And I think that actually, you know, I think it's a natural thing. I mean, it just goes to show that if we put ourselves in comfort for too long, we'll fall back into those habits, and that's, to me, that's the all the better case
Right.
to say, hey, you need to regularly challenge yourself. You can't just have one life experience, say, okay, got it, I'm
Yes.
good, I figured it
Yes.
out. I went to the mountain, and I talked to the guy up there, and he gave me the secret, and now I got it. It's like, yeah, dude, we forget really fast.
Right.
um and so we have to go out and we have to do more hard shit to remind ourselves, oh yeah, this is what it feels like. This is what it feels like to suffer and have that stuff taken away from me. And it gives you that sense of gratitude that it's really easy to lose in our everyday lives.
That's so true. That's so true. And it was interesting to for me. It was like, getting back into it. I was waking up every morning, making the kids breakfast, enjoying the time and all this
Hmm.
stuff, and all of a sudden you just fall back into that. And it was sad because it was like, you know, you shouldn't have to be able you should be able to block out a lot of the noise. We figured out how to, but you can't put yourself in those situations that's not a normal thing to go out in the
No,
wilderness.
no, it is. Well, not in this day. It used to be, right?
Right.
I think a lot of the problems of our society, are the result of our technological advances. And, it's great that we're to the point that we are, but it comes with some negative effects, right? I
Yep.
think a lot of the stuff, the issues that people have, you didn't see as much of it, a few hundred years ago, because people were just busy trying not to die. They didn't have time to think and worry about all this extra stuff, that we now throw on our plates, and now are shouldering the burden of trying to figure out.
And we call it stress.
And we call it stress, and it's a real thing. But I mean, there's also stress that, like, okay, the stress of, hey, I need to go and find things to eat, and I need to go and source my water, and oh yeah, by the way, I need to keep this fire going because
Yep.
it's pouring down raining, and if it goes out, it's going to take me forever to get it back going again. Those are stresses, but it's interesting how, but they're real, right?
They're real. They're
we're
yeah.
not we're not creating,
Yep.
fictional stresses like we do today, because now we have the luxury to sit and ponder and
Yeah.
tell all these stories to ourselves of all these things that may or may not happen. We're fabricating because they haven't come true. But I
Right.
know, hey man, if I don't get this fire started, I will 100% freeze to death tonight,
Right.
period.
And we'll
Right.
have no
And
water because and that's it's all the more that I think about it, and having been on that show and all the other things is, it truly comes down to perspective
Hmm.
and your perspective of your purpose. And that's such a powerful thing when you talk about purpose, because I always talk about purpose and passion because it's something that you're willing to die for, your passion.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would say my family and everything, but at the end of the day, what are you willing to do to make that a priority? Are you willing to, how are you going to make that? Because everybody's passionate about their family. Everybody feels that passion, but it's something that makes you whole. And I think
Yeah.
that's what you have to look at. You have to look at a smaller thing that's truly yours. And a lot of people say, "Oh, well, that's selfish." It's like, no, that's not selfish, because if you don't grow, you're not going to help anybody else.
Right. Well, and this idea of complete selflessness, right?
That's not
um
it's not functional.
no, it isn't. I mean, there are certain things that we have to do for ourselves to keep going. We cannot, none of us can be completely selfless indefinitely, because we'll just end up shriveling and die. Like, you have to be able to do things for yourself.
Right.
Um and so by extension, that means that, I mean, we can look at that on a micro thing of like, okay, I have to eat, I have to breathe, I have to do this to stay alive. But
Right.
when we're talking about, our purpose, what fills our soul, that's an
Hmm.
important thing as well. And if we neglect that for too long, things start to go, pretty squirrely for us. Um, and
Yeah.
the hard part is it's easy to tell ourselves we're doing the right thing because, oh man, I'm putting my family first. That's my passion. And it's like, yeah, but you're doing it at the expense of yourself, and eventually you're just going to be a empty husk. And at that point, you are no good to your family, and therefore you're actually doing them a disservice. You
Right.
know what I mean? So the tricky part is figuring out, okay, where is that line? Because it's really easy for me. I can take that selfish route and really run it, you know pretty far. For me, filling my soul for the longest time was training, right?
Right.
Training and competing and fighting. And so that was my passion. Everything was built around that, often to the detriment of my friends and family, you know
But what if you didn't have that? I think that's where it comes into play. Is you can equate it to like a car. So if I fill my fancy car up with gas that's not the right kind of gas, so it's like your body. If I'm filling my body with a purpose that's not really the driving purpose in my life, same thing as a car. If I don't fill it up with the right gas, it's not going to run well, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Same thing with your body and your mind, is that if I'm filling myself with a purpose that's BS, a purpose that's somebody else's, a purpose that doesn't really have anything that's going to drive me past that comfort zone, it's your car is going to break down.
Oh yeah,
You're,
no, for sure. How and in the same token, if I run that car too long, too hard in the red line without performing any kind of maintenance on it, I'm not going to go very far either. And for
right,
me, that was kind of the way that I was going, where, yes, this was my passion, yes, this was fulfilling me, but I was going excessively in that direction,
right,
selfishly, right, and not striking that balance. And that can be the hard part. Too little and you're left empty, too much and you throw a rod,
right.
because you're going too hard. So,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? So it's like,
that's a
okay,
great
where
point.
where
That's a
is that
great point.
fine line? And that's, I think that's the stasis that most of us are finding ourselves in, where it's like, okay, man, where's my left and right limit, and can I keep it in between there? And am I sensitive to my surroundings enough to know when I'm getting too far one way or too far the other?
Yeah,
And that's, for me, that's where I think my own perspective comes in, but the outside perspective I think is really helpful. That's where having some other dudes who know you and who you trust, they can look and they can say, "Hey, man, I don't know if you know this or not, but you haven't changed your oil in like 6,000 miles. Just saying, man. I know you're using that high mileage stuff and you can stretch it, but might want to consider. You know what I mean? I mean, we're
Oh,
using the
I
car
complete.
analogy,
No,
right?
I
But
completely agree with because like I got that Guinness World Record, and it's interesting because I've used the avenue of triathlon from to help me deal with PTSD and help me deal with just the issues that I have and trying to be a better person for my family and myself. And it's interesting because I go out there and I'm able to inspire people by what I do. And for the longest time, I didn't truly understand it. And I did a race in February in New Zealand, and I hadn't done a race in a long time, and uh, I went and did it, and it was interesting. I finished a race with like probably about 10 minutes to go before midnight. You have 17 hours to finish the whole race. I finished it in 16 hours and 50 minutes for a full Ironman, and it wasn't the finish line. It's like I have all these medals up there, but they're more for reminding me of why I'm here. It's not of yay me, because the races, it was the journey that I took. It was
yeah,
the pain that I felt during that race that made me feel alive. It was
yeah,
that I was pushing that envelope, finding
uh
that
huh,
comfort zone and saying, fuck off, I'm going to go to that next level. And
yeah.
that's the key is like, I'm sure that was the same with fighting is that, not a lot of people want to walk into a ring and go, hey, let's try to beat each other up here. That's
Well, and
different.
yeah, I think the key, I mean, with endurance stuff, and I think with fighting to some degree as well, is there's a lot of opportunities to quit.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean, literally at any moment, during the course of that, you could have that conversation with yourself of like, you know what, man, I I think I could be done, right? And the what we can gain is when we are able to, like you said, silence that voice and say, nope, sorry, we're going to keep going, And the more
Yeah.
we can train ourselves and practice that, I think the more value we have. The more value it has, and the more resilient we could become, which again ultimately makes us better individuals.
Right.
The more resilient we are to quitting when shit gets hard, the more capable we become of doing anything, and that's I think that's what, why you inspire so many people to do what you're doing, because it is so hard, and so many people would quit and would never even attempt something as audacious as, that level of exertion. And yet, as a man, as a mere mortal, you have to deal with the same mental stuff to keep you going, and that's the part that people can really respect and be inspired by. But so we need people to do that.
Right. You
It's
hit it.
important.
And you hit it on the head, and the fact that going back to that the purpose part is that you were saying to the effect of you have to find that uncomfortable zone, that challenge in your life, and the uncomfortable is not always something that people are willing to go to or are able to find. They find the normal every day as uncomfortable, whereas like when we were on that show, it was uncomfortable because it was really came to life and death. It
Yeah,
came to you have to do this or else it's not going to work. And that's that, you know, I think everyday people, whether you're working in an office or you're a firefighter or you're a police officer or, whatever it is, small business owner, you have to look at the problems and the challenges that you go as is this uncomfortable or is this just a little bump?
yeah,
And that's where people can start to grow more is to start to sit there and identify and not just moan and bitch and complain about every little thing, and
right.
just go, okay, let me sit down and say, is getting a paper cut because I've done too many TPS reports truly an issue?
Yeah, is this enough that should totally ruin my day?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And completely, you know, derail me from what I'm doing. I just can't even. I'm done with it, right? And that all comes back to perspective, right?
Right.
But
Yep.
the only way we can gain perspective is through experience,
Oh,
right?
very. Yep.
Do you know what I mean? Like the only perspective I have is my
What I allow
immediate
myself.
situation,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And so if I have nothing else to draw upon to then look at it from another angle, then all I see is that problem in front of me. But if I can approach it and all of a sudden I can shift and I go, oh, wait a minute. Okay, that now I can see some solutions. And again, the more experience I have to draw from, the more angles I can look at a problem, the more likely I am to come up with a solution, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Oh,
Um,
completely. And your solution instead of somebody else's. Because that's the hard thing is like for you, definitely something that I gained from you was the perspective of patience. And on that show is like that first that when we were first out there, I'm not good with quiet situations. I either have to have music on, I have to have a TV show, podcast,
sure.
whatever it is. I'm not good in my own head, and that's why, when I do Ironman triathlons, it's good for me because I have to be in my own head and I have to have that the internal conversation that I don't like to have.
Yeah.
And that's more painful than any kind of physical pain that you could put on me. You could break
Sure.
my arm and my leg. I'd be fine with that, but put me in a room for an hour by myself without anything else, that's torture. That's
Yeah.
torture.
Well, and I was gonna say, speaking of being uncomfortable, and I was gonna bring up being, so we get dropped off in a helicopter at the top of a mountain and just told to simply wait
Yeah.
and endure. And it's like, what?
Do
What does that
what?
what does that mean? You're like, yeah, we get this little scroll and it's like super cryptic and ambiguous and like, I don't know, we're looking at you, looking at Sean. It's like, I don't know, man. It just says to sit here and wait. Well, for how long? I don't know. I
Yeah.
thought this was a survival show. Kind of. Well, if we're doing survival, I'm not just going to sit on this open rock at the top of a mountain. Dude, it's going to get dark. It's going to get cold. We need shelter. We need all these things. It's like, nope. This girl says to sit and wait. And I remember that being
Yep.
like just
It's brutal.
incredibly difficult. And it was right. It was in its
Yep.
own right, but not but for you, not for the reasons that everyone else would have problems with.
Yeah.
Your The issue was, oh man, I can't do anything. I just have to be here, and I have to be inside my own head. And I think I don't think that that's completely unique to you, Rob. I
No.
think for a lot of people that's something that they struggle with. Um, for me, I've spent my entire life in my own head, um, which has its own problem. It can be problematic in its own way, but like I'm very comfortable just like being alone with my thoughts. I don't need any stimulus. I can just be there, right?
Right. Oh
Um,
yeah.
and in some respect, I relish that, right? And I need that more than I actually get it. But I think for a lot of us, we've grown so accustomed to getting constant feedback from things, and now when we're out that, we don't. Whoa, what do I do, right? And then
Right.
when you have someone who is gone through and experienced the things that you've seen and you've done, um, and we're all dealing with stuff that we probably haven't completely unpacked and
Right.
fully figured out yet. Compound that with your scenario, and now all of a sudden, man, that becomes a really really uncomfortable situation.
Yeah.
um and I think that would probably be a good segue to give a little bit of backstory, because some of the folks may not have seen the TV show, or they may not know your history. So, um, if you would, and this is part of the reason why I wanted to bring you on, for this timing, was because you were there at 9/11. Um, at ground zero in there, and obviously we're coming up on that anniversary, and I wanted to talk about this because we it's easy to say, hey, let's never forget this, right? And
Right.
you'll see so many
Most of it.
pictures going up, so many posts saying you'll never forget, and always remember, and all these things. um but I think that's easy to say, and then we post that, and then we go about our day, and we're not really remembering it.
Right.
um and I don't think that we're remembering it in the way that it needs to be remembered, in that, yes, this was a tragic event, but from those ashes we were able to come out to the other side, and now here we are, right?
Right.
And I think it would be a disservice to all of those who sacrificed and lost their lives that day to not take and show the gratitude for us actually being here and coming through the other side, not only ourselves individually, but also as a nation. The fact that our nation was able to work through that catastrophic event.
Right.
And so, you personally, you're probably the closest person that I know to that. And so, um, man, I know this is probably not the easiest thing to talk about in the world, but I'd love to just get, you know, get some of your perspective on the scenario and, you know, both literally and figuratively what you kind of took away from that, because we'll segue into that takeaway in a minute.
Yeah. So I was 23 years old when that happened. I had been on the fire department for 1 year, and the morning of 9/11, I was working shift at the fire department, and we had a fire that evening, or that morning, I should say. And we got back, and being a rookie, I went up and was getting ready, cleaning off, getting everything ready, and um, at the time, I was listening to the radio in the shower and heard that one of the trade towers had been hit, and didn't really think anything of it. I mean, I was 23, dumb, just not thinking fully, and then came down and was watching the TV, and then the other trade tower was hit, and you could see the plane going into it, and I was a part of a rescue team, and there was no flights or anything that you could take, so I just took my purple little Saturn car and drove out to New York City, and got there and just went right to work on the pile. It was more search and recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And at 23, I had no idea what to expect. And walking up there, it looked like a movie scene. And I think that was the only way I've been able to tell people what it looked like a movie scene. You had the big lights up, and you didn't really understand if it was day or night. Just working around the clock. There was a group of recliners I always remember that was just off of the pile that people would sleep in, but there was nobody ever sleeping in them, because right next to that was they had wrote morgue next to it, but there was nobody in that either. And so it was just surreal. It was one of those experiences. You had heavy machinery working, you had um, people from all over. It was everybody was working together. You had yeah, it was. It's always interesting to remember things, because for so long I tried to forget it, and then you have flashbacks that are little memories of things here and there, and um, for so long I wasn't able to deal with what I had seen and what I had been through. Um, and some of the stories I always told were like the 10,000 foot level, and
Yeah.
that's what you always hear. You hear the 10,000 foot level of, yeah, I was there, and we went through the rubble, and you'd sleep in different areas of the rubble, and um, but yeah, there's one of the things I always tell people and remember is um, one of the days I was working on the pile, and I walked off, and they had the porta potties. It was set in front of one of the buildings, just off the World Trade Center, area, and there was rebar that was shot into the glass. All the glass was pretty much broken out. You'd have I beams that are hanging into the building, and I went in the porta potty, and I had a jumpsuit on, and I went in there, and then I came out, and as I'm walking back to where I was supposed to be working, I pissed my pants, and it was one of those things. At the time I was like, fuck, but it's where you can go to mentally. Like, I had thought I went to the bathroom already,
Yeah.
and I walked out, and I just went all over, and that's the level of that everybody was there. That wasn't just
Yeah.
me,
Sure.
and that's
Well,
yeah.
I mean, trauma like that is something that we hope that we never have to experience, because I mean, I can't imagine, but that it's so much to process that your mind is no longer in a normal state, right?
It's in a
You are in a
survival
just
state.
a it's in a survival state, but like to a magnitude that most of us would never be able to comprehend, right? And so
Right.
trying to operate within that, I mean, your faculties and everything are going to be just completely out of sort. But it does. I mean, I think that makes it really real for the folks that obviously haven't had that experience. Like you can imagine, like man, how crazy and intense and shook up would you have to be to not recognize that you didn't piss in the porter john and you actually peed your pants while you were out of it. And it's like, okay, yeah, that man, that tells a really, you know, visceral story of like the intensity of that situation. Was there any point as you were going through there, like I imagine, man, like I imagine looking at that and you've got this just insurmountable task in front of you. Man, was there a point of just like complete abject hopelessness of just like, man, this is an exercise in futility and this is, you know what I mean? Were those moments of doubts, or did you feel so strongly about, what you were doing that you were like, you know what, man, this is what has to be done, and it doesn't matter if I'm here for the next 10 years of my life sifting through this, like so be it. I mean, what
I
was the
think
thought process there?
I think in the moment, I remember one of the times when I was tagged up with one of the USAR task force, and we were certain they did such an amazing job with like segmenting, gridding off the areas, and you'd have certain areas that you'd be going through, and every once in a while you'd see some of the FDNY guys, and I can't even imagine what they were going through as well. I mean, that kind of lost 343 firemen that were, firefighters that were lost. Um, that's I can't even imagine that.
Just being that
And
close to home, like your home
right,
turf, like your people, because it's, I mean,
and you feel
we're
bad. You feel bad because there's I think the mentality is that, well, should have that been me, or could have I helped out, could have something changed differently if I was there? And that's that
yeah,
family feeling that you have. And I remember a crew, I can't remember what engine crew they were, but um, they were going through, and we were searching one of the grids, and they came by and they said, have you found anything over here? This is where their truck was. This is where it was. And
man.
we're asking, we're like, what are you guys looking for? And they're like, this is where it was, this is where they were. And it was so hard to try. I'm 23 years old.
Yeah.
I don't have the life experience at this point to have any kind of cognitive function that's going to be good enough to help these
Well, and
individuals
yeah, I mean, you want so desperately to comfort
to
these
find
guys,
anything, to
to,
find
to do
anything.
to do anything that's productive, and whether that's physically, tangibly finding something, or just giving a kind word, you know what I mean, to help in some way, and that's why, I it would be tough at that age and in that circumstance to feel anything but helpless. And then the fact that we've got so many of these guys that are there, and despite all that, despite the odds, despite the circumstances, they're still doing their job.
Right,
Do you know what I mean? Doing what they're supposed to, man. I mean, that's, to me, that's one of the things that's worth remembering, of like, the human spirit, the American spirit, that like, hey, we've got, say what you want about where we're at as a country, but we've
right,
got some fucking stellar, outstanding individuals here that will, at the drop of a hat, drive across the country or go headlong into the storm to do the job that needs to be done. And I think that that for me
that's the
was
takeaway.
was an important takeaway. You know what I
Right,
mean? Where it's like, and that's the part that I always remember is like, hey, those guys are still around. We still have those guys, and you know, I'll be damned if I'm gonna let anything happen to that. It's best of my ability. Like I want to prop up keep those guys' memory, keep those guys' existence. Like we can't lose those guys. Like for our
Mhm.
society to function, we got to have those people. So again, I don't care what direction, what side you want to vote, or where your political allegiances lie. Like man, as long as we have guys like that in our world, we're going to be fine. The second those die out and go away, man, we're up the creek.
And that's
So that
yeah, and that's the big thing. You're talking about the takeaway, and for so many freaking years, I can't even. I went through two marriages, and the hard part is finding yourself. And we were talking about that selfish adventure, and I had to create something in my mind to be able to figure out how I take this negative, this you know doing bucket brigades, and knowing what was in those buckets, and some of the things, there's a lot of things that you take away that were negative from that day, and a lot of changes in my life, coming back from that at 23 years old, that I didn't understand. And years and years and years later, taking away when people would ask me, like, what was it like? And you say, there'll be a ton of people with the never forget, and that's fine, never forget, but never forget that that day we learned what humanity truly can do when we work together. We never forget that that day should be the same way. Somebody said a quote one time, and they said, I wish every day was like September 12th.
yeah,
And not because of that incident, but because of how we treated each other. Nobody was, everybody worked towards a common goal of moving forward and surviving. And we talked about this earlier, being on that show, is everything was stripped away from us. Our
yeah,
security, our feeling of anything. And
yeah.
security is one of those big things. That's comfort.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, perspective, right? All of a sudden, the entire nation woke up and had an entirely different perspective on things,
Yeah.
and like we were saying, unfortunately, over time, just like you and I did with the perspective of the TV show and what we learned on that survival thing, we forget, I mean, it's just it's a sad fact of human nature. Like we have very selective memories and very short memories of when times are bad, and it's a
Right.
coping mechanism. It's a natural thing, and we can fight it as much as we want to, but that's just the way things are. And so you know either we can be forced to, by some external influence, be put in that situation, and
Right.
then we get if we survive, when we gain some kind of perspective, um, or we can selectively put ourselves in trying, difficult, uncomfortable situations to gain that perspective.
Right.
And hopefully if we do that, then we don't have to do the other side where we're forced into it, because the
Right.
outcome of that is generally far more negative. And
Right.
I think that, on a macro scale, that's important, but I think, for the individual, that's important as well. We need those little, that we when may not always little, but we need some of those uncomfortable challenges as a
Right.
reminder of, like, hey, it can always be worse. you
And I
know
think, yeah, and I think, one of the big things that I, definitely want to hit on is, perspective of uh, challenges. I think there's a lot of issues with a lot of people feeling that in our career field, like especially in the fire department, and I think in the military as well, is that, you know, for a lot of years I felt like what I went through was not worse than what somebody else had went through, so I shouldn't talk about it.
Mhm. Yep.
My pain was minimal compared to what other somebody else had, and I think in our fields, in this, in this macho field, in this is, you think about, I like the savage gentleman of we're all a part of a community, we're all a part of something that's bigger than us, and each of us has a life, a journey, a experiences. We react to things differently, we act different ways, we have different levels of emotion that we go through, and we can't put on somebody else, like something like what Marcus Luttrell went through, like Lone Survivor. You know, that's that's just off the charts crazy experience. Like his level of understanding of the importance of little things in life is crazy. But that
Yes.
doesn't mean that Joe Smith, who has worked, and I'm not picking any fields or anything like that,
Right.
but just uh, in finance, that
Mhm.
his challenges are not valid.
Right. It doesn't negate someone else's struggle. And that's the thing
Exactly.
that, that's the thing we have to remember is like, it's very easy for us to project our own existence onto someone else, but there's no way of knowing what that person is going through.
Right.
And to him, it could be, on the same level of that as that lone survivor situation. And you don't know that. And there's, so it's like, hey, man, suffice to say, everyone is going through something. Everyone has been through something. To what degree, to what extent,
It's not our
nobody
judgment to
knows.
do.
Right,
Yeah.
and that applies to ourselves too, because again, it's really easy to write off and explain away,
Right.
like, that kind of sucked, but it wasn't as bad as the way this guy had it, and then we don't validate our own experience
Or pain.
or pain, and
Yeah.
then and so then we don't confront it, and that becomes again another problem in and of itself. And
Right.
I wanted to touch on this a little bit because for me, this was one of the most powerful takeaways I had from the TV show, in our experience out there. And I wish that the actual airing and the final cut, the way they edited it would have reflected this better or highlighted it more, because it was just so profound. Um, Going back to again other people's experiences, right? When I met you on the show, you had this you had this thing. It's like, man, I can't be alone with my thoughts because I've been through, and I'm like, well, dude, I get that, man.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's probably something you're going to need to figure out. You know, I can't do it for you, but you might want to look into that. You know,
Oh yeah.
and that and then that was enhanced when you told the story of the blanket that you found. So
Yeah.
in that search mission, while you're there and you're going through the rubble, you came across a child's blanket that you took a small piece of and kept with you.
Hmm.
And dude, that just was just an absolute gut punch. Hearing that story, I was just like, oh my gosh, I could not believe that. And then out of your pocket comes a small piece of that, the actual blanket that was there, for 15, 16 years, 17 years or something at that time. You still had it, and you explained, you're like, yeah, dude, I took this on every single race. I mean, every single one of those medals that is behind you,
Hmm.
that thing was with you. And I was so torn, because that's like such a beautiful and endearing expression, right? And at the same time, I'm looking at it of like, he's been holding on to all of that, all of that pain and all of that hurt and that entire thing for so long. Like, I mean, the physical embodiment of holding on to it, you know what I
Right.
mean? And
Yeah.
granted, the weight of that, it was only a couple of ounces, but you could see, like, visibly see the weight of that, was astronomical that you carried around, you know,
Yeah. By
and
far.
I think a lot of us do that, in a lot of different ways. We carry around, you know, from whatever experiences we've gone through, we keep it with us. And so I was like, look, I can't tell this guy what to do. It's just in my own thought. And I don't know if I
Yeah.
told you this or not.
No,
Um,
I didn't hear this.
but like I'm thinking, I'm like, man, he's got to let go of that thing. I don't know if it's here. I don't know when. I don't know where. I don't know how. But it's like, man, for him, knowing that,
Yeah.
like, okay, the guy's got some serious, you know, PTSD issues. He has a hard time being alone in his thoughts, and it's like, well, of course, he's holding on to all this stuff, and not in a positive way, in a bad
Right.
way,
Yep.
right? And I was like, man, he's got to let go and he's got to get rid of that thing. But again, it's like, man, that's not my place to say that,
That's
So I
hard to.
didn't.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
didn't. I kept that to myself. So we finished that mission. Um, I was super impressed. You made it through suffering and just
Suffering.
being quiet and just in your own alone thoughts. And then the next mission we got split up, and you went with a different group of guys. You were with
Yeah.
JD
Jade.
and Sean,
Yep.
right? And so you did your thing. I'm out surviving, doing my thing. And then we come back and we regroup. And then these guys tell me the story. They're like, dude, you're not gonna believe what happened. I was like, what? Remember that? Remember that blanket that Rob had? Yeah. And here I'm thinking, I'm like, oh my gosh, dude, yeah, that freaking blanket, dude, that's tough, man. And they're like, yeah. So just one night while we are out there, he just unsolicited on his own. He's like, you know what, guys? I think it's time for me to let go of this thing. And you literally put that in the fire,
Yeah.
and like what better symbolic thing, like from the ashes
To the
committing it back to the ashes. You know what I mean? And it's
Yep.
like, and hearing that story, hearing you tell it, and like an asshole, I just told your story for you, which is
No,
like
but I let no
rule number one of like podcasting. You don't do that in an
no
interview.
that's but that's the thing. You know, that was a huge part of my life, and for you to tell it back, it even makes me feel better in the fact that that it's not saying validation, but it is a validation that that was something that was very trying for me. That was my identity for the longest
Mhm.
time of you got to live each day, you got to live with purpose. And it's always interesting, like you said, you didn't want to step in and say, hey, you got to get rid of that. And it's interesting because that night that I put it into the fire, JD was talking and Sean and I were talking, and we were talking about a lot of the traumas that we'd had in our lives, and we were tearing down barriers and
Well, because these
talking
guys are
about,
also vets. I mean, they've
oh,
seen they've
yeah,
seen all kinds of crazy stuff as well. So I mean, it was.
yeah,
I mean, what a great group. Like I was really happy that you guys got paired together because I think that was
uh,
really important.
yeah, and it was tearing down those walls, and like JD would say, win a moment, win a minute, win an hour, win a day, and it was interesting just hearing the stories and like what we were all carrying with us.
Hmm.
And then it was that realization that you had thought of, and it was like, I just need to get rid of this because this isn't pushing me forward. I'm pushing myself forward. And it was that realization that my purpose is I'm still alive. I have a reason to keep going. Until I'm dead, I have to keep going. I have to keep moving forward. I have to keep doing something because I'm here.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
Mhm.
And that was,
Absolutely.
yeah. And it's funny because it's like, I always the hardest part in life is being honest with somebody else when they don't know what to do, because we fear that, like, if you would have came up to me and said, you know what, you need to get rid of that, that probably would have I would have went, you're right. And it's
Well,
it's
in
interesting.
fairness, because I mean, here's the thing: I had literally only known you for 18 hours
That
at
was a
that point.
long 18 hours though,
It
brother.
was a long 18 hours, but like when that came up, like we had only been out there. I mean, we'd only been out there for like a day and a half or so, or half a day or whatever. Like
Felt
it
like
was.
10.
I know. It was so. It was something that for me, I just I felt very strongly, but it's like, well, let's give it some time. I really, should probably get to know this guy a little bit. But I had made up in my mind at some point, if that came up again later on,
Right.
that would be something that I'd bring up. But, you know, I didn't have to because you came to it on your completely on your own. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, which is super cool. And in terms of validation, man, like that is something. that is something that I'll never forget. Like that is something that I still, think about pretty frequently. You know what I mean? When I think about things that I'm holding on to, things of the past that aren't really doing anything to push me forward, they're really just weighing me down.
Right.
And I think like, why? What good is this? What utility does this serve?
Right.
Right? And then I think about you and your that experience, and then it allows me to let go. I can cast it into the fire because yeah, I don't need that anymore. That's not who I am. That's not serving me a purpose. It's useless baggage. You know what I mean?
Right.
I can take the part of that experience,
Right.
and that's the thing, right? You like you've taken from that experience. You didn't just. It's not like throwing that away. You've just completely forgotten about everything and it's gone away.
No.
No, you've taken the good and you've moved forward with it, and then the bad you've left behind because you don't need it. And I think that was the symbolism of that. Like still, like I said, stays with me, and it's something that I think think and reflect on pretty frequently, actually.
Yeah, I remember, my memory kind of fades me a lot, and you know that's one of those things that I do remember. I remember us sitting up on that rock, and there's two moments, well, three moments that I truly remember on that show was, one, our first mission and sitting up on the rock, and I kept going. I wanted to go down to that little grassy area with the
Yep.
trees, and because I wanted to move, I wanted to do something, and you
Well, and
guys said no.
survival dictates like, hey man, get to the low ground. You're gonna die just being exposed on the top of a mountain like an idiot. Like that's not what you do if you want to stay alive. But the rules of engagement said
Yep.
otherwise. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
and yeah, we had to keep having that that back and forth conversation.
And I remember I got a little pissy
Hmm.
a few, two or
Yeah.
three times, and it was powerful because you guys like, fucking just chill, just exist, and it was the first time I've kind of had to,
Yeah.
or I've been in essence forced
Hmm.
to do that and
And
and not have anything.
well, and sometimes, man, we that's the only way we can do it. Like
Right.
we'll only get our own selves so uncomfortable. Like we can
Right.
only self-inflict so much stuff before we will eventually throw in the towel. It's like, okay, that's enough. Um, so we have to trick ourselves, right? We have to find ways to get ourselves beyond, and then it's like, oh man, now I'm in this place that didn't expect. I
Yep.
find that's what you have to sometimes do, and then like your step in that process was just saying yes to coming to the show. You're like,
Right.
I don't know what's gonna. I know I'm gonna be uncomfortable. I don't know to what extent. I don't know for how long, um, but I know this is gonna be good for me in some way, so I'm going to say yes, I'm going to move forward. And then, we find ourselves in these situations that we just, totally would never have expected. You know what I mean? And that's where that growth occurs because, again, it's, never in your wildest dream would you probably have thought, hey, I'm going to confront this thing headlong.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that would have ever occurred to you. And so, I'm sure you run into similar epiphanies when you sign up for some of these races and you're like,
Yeah.
well, I'm committed now.
Yeah.
I'm here. And then, somewhere along mile, 110 or whatever, you're just like, oh boy, well, I've
What is
made
the
it this
point?
far. There's no
Yeah.
there's no turning back now. And
Yep.
that, getting ourselves to that point where, it's do or die to some extent. I mean, it's not literally do or die, but
Just
uh,
understanding there's no the best thing is understanding there's no finish line. The journey doesn't end, like the medals in the background. The journey doesn't end with medals. The journey doesn't
right.
end with a finish line or a time or anything like that. It's the journey is the whole thing.
Yeah,
It's
it's not
it's
about the top of the mountain. It's
no.
about what you did to get there. And even if you didn't get to the actual summit, you know what I mean?
Yep.
There's still a lot to be gained from that from that excursion,
Right.
you know?
And the
And
best part is you got to come down from the damn mountain.
yeah,
You
you
know,
still have that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't see many people living on the top of Everest, do you?
No.
It's like you summit and then you still have the journey back down the mountain. And then maybe you can go back up another time, but so many people, we live in valleys. We live
Yeah.
in valleys. We don't live on mountaintops. And so many people feel that, especially with like the things that we value in society is money, stature, fame, things like that. And it's, after 9/11 on September 12th, what we valued was our lives. What we valued was
And the people around
friendship.
us. Yep.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And it was
Yep.
simple. It was simple things that we valued and understood that, all things can go away. Your monetary possessions, your physical possessions, all these things can go away in a heartbeat.
Mhm.
And that the biggest thing that we want to have is that connection. That connection that, you know what? I don't care who you are, what your name is, where you come from, what you like to do. I'm here for you.
Yeah. Well, it's this idea, man. It's like, hey, look, despite whatever differences we may decide upon, or whether they're real or fictitious, it's like, hey, man, we're all on this hunk of rock together. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like that. There's that's the kind of the thing that matters. If we look over and we see someone struggling, you know, that we see ourselves in that person because, man, we're all in this thing together, right?
Right.
So we reach over and we lend a hand and we help out and we lift that person up. Um, and then we forget because we do. You
All
know,
right.
time goes by. We lose
Easy
that
to forget.
perspective, and so again, hopefully we at least remember, oh hey man, I've kind of lost some perspective. I need to do something to gain that back. And then we, whatever that is for us, whether it's Iron Man, whether it's stepping in the cage, whether whatever your deal is, right? That, you know, whether it
Hmm.
is climbing a mountain or, you know, sitting in a sensory deprivation tank, whatever you got to do to find it, man,
Right.
find it, come back down from the mountain, and continue to exist in the valley, and then rinse and repeat. And hopefully, again, if we get good at life, we can wreck it before we start becoming
Like that.
shitheads
Yep.
again.
Yeah.
um as we get some experience, before we start to go completely off the rails, we realize, oh hey man, look at the time, I gotta go do my thing, be right back. Okay, man, now I'm a decent human being again. And, eventually maybe I don't know, because I haven't been around long enough. Maybe we reach this point of, enlightenment where we just can exist in that state indefinitely. I haven't found it yet.
Yeah. I
I'm
think it's
still,
hard. It's
but
hard to do that with all the distractions and,
it is. And,
yeah.
I mean, I still got a ways to go, man. I 34 years old. So it's like, haven't had that much time to figure this shit out. So I'm still working on it. So
Yeah.
literally everything that I say comes with an asterisk and a grain of salt. Like, hey, some results may vary. Uh, so, take it for what it's worth. So speaking of going out and doing our thing, you actually have an event coming up, which when people hear this, it will already have happened, most likely. But this weekend,
Yep.
you're going to go out. You're doing a full Ironman, half Ironman. What are you
Yeah,
doing?
so I've got a full Ironman this weekend and a half next weekend. So the full Ironman
Holy
this
shit!
weekend, yeah, I know. Not, I've never been claimed as the smartest person.
Oh,
So I've got
man.
a full Ironman this weekend, but kind of doing it a little different. So doing it for a charity called My Team Triumph.
Okay.
They help disabled individuals find their finish line. And so we're actually going to be pushing. We're Team Jenny, one of my good friends from Utah. Actually,
Oh,
he's a pro triath was a pro triathlete. He's going to do the swim and the bike. So he'll pull her in a boat for the swim, 2.4 miles in the swim.
shit!
He will
Are
pull
you
her
kidding me?
on the bike. No, on the bike for 112 miles, and then I will push her in for 26.2 miles in my full gear.
Dude,
So, but it's
that
cool
is that
because
is an inhuman effort, man. That is unbelievable. And I
yeah,
think sometimes I wonder, because I've never touched those distances. Well, I've done 50 miles on foot in the mountains, but I've never swam that far. I've never biked anywhere close to that. Um, but I think most of us, having run at least 1 mile,
Yeah.
in grade school or whatever, hopefully can have some appreciation for the just how insanely ridiculously hard and long and difficult that exertion is going to be.
Yeah, it just it gets to a point, and that's why I love doing it, because it gets to a point where the physicality of it goes away, and it gets to the mental side. And because at some point your body doesn't really know what to do. Your body is going, you know what, you dumbass, you need to
do i
stop.
do I piss myself? Do I shit
Yeah,
myself? Do I
exactly.
do both? I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
Yeah, it's like this doesn't make any sense, and then your brain just goes, "Yeah, it makes sense. Let's keep going. Stop whining. Just keep moving." And I think that's what gets me through the things is that mental challenge of it. I think that's what's so valuable to me, especially for these races. And people find the value in different ways of challenging themselves, but this is my way. And the
Yeah.
weekend after, I get to go to California, and I'm doing a half Ironman there by myself. And then the run portion, Ironman Foundation has this thing called Gold Star Initiative.
Okay.
And what it is for the run, I'll be doing the race for a Gold Star family. And I'll be carrying the U.S. flag with the name of the fallen individual on the flag for the whole run portion.
Wow.
And I'll be doing that one in gear again as well. So and that's
I I
it'll be
I
fun.
love that you're doing these not just for your own like edification, but for charities and for other causes and that sort of thing. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like, man, that's dude. And you're
it's
doing those basically back to back, so you will have
yeah,
logged hundreds upon hundreds of miles of effort in the
yeah,
matter of like what 4 days probably
yeah. It'll be maybe 5.
5 days. Oh, okay. Oh well, if it's 5 days, then geez, any
I know,
asshole can do that.
handsy.
Gee, I mean, you need to, yeah. If you're not doing them back to back
Yeah,
or the same day, then oh my
yeah,
gosh.
yeah.
Um, well, I am eager to hear how that goes and what epiphanies you may have during that effort. I often find that some of my best revelations come from thoroughly kicking my own ass
Oh, by far,
in
by
some
far.
way or the other. If people want to reach out to you, if people want to find you or follow you or
Yeah.
support you, because I imagine it takes a little bit. I mean, to go
Yeah.
travel to these places to gear up for the training. If people want to donate to the cause or whatever it is, what's the best way to do that? How can they get a hold of
So,
you?
so if you go to firemanrob.com, that's pretty much has all my information. I do keynote speaking as well as I'm going to be starting putting out some online training and a few books and stuff like
Oh,
that.
cool.
And realistically, it's I love what I do, and as far as fundraising, I have some great sponsors that really take care of me to be able to facilitate my expenses. And I think my whole thing is I love what I do, and I want people to take away that there's so many things nowadays that are asking you, hey, can you donate to this, can you give to this, and can you take from and realistically, my approach, having moving forward from this year, is saying, you know what, I want you to take away, because that's what life's about. Is like, I want to be that impact, kind of like exactly what you're doing, is being that impact for other people, to take away something at the end of the day. Yes, is my time valuable? Yes, it is. But my time is valuable when I can teach my kids that in life, monetary is monetary, and value is value. And a lot of times people, one of my favorite quotes is, don't live a life to be successful, live a life to be valued. And that's really what it comes down at the end of the day, is we go back to that, finding your purpose and your perspective of who you want to be in this life. And we said never forget, but I want you to say never forget what it takes to be the best person that you can be every single day, and know that other people have sacrificed so that you can get the opportunity to do that. That should be what you should never forget.
Mm. Dude, that's powerful, man. I think I think that's probably the best way in my mind that we can honor this day, honor what happened, and as best as we can from the ashes of that tragedy, you know what I mean,
Right.
find the positive in that. And that was really something that I wanted to do, because it's like, man, every year this comes around and you think
Yep.
about it, and it's like, you feel like, well, what can I do, or what am I doing, or what have I been doing, all of a
Yeah.
sudden, you see this, you're like, oh yeah, that happened. And then you're like, well, shit, have I been even, like, you know what have I done, right?
Right. Right.
And so, I having this conversation with you has been for me like very, very, very rewarding. It's like, okay, man, I think that's a really good way um, to just reflect upon what happened. Because
Right.
it is important that we do that. You know, even though it's not, it's not all sunshine and roses, right?
Nope.
We still, I think as men, we have to confront that head on, and you know, like I said, pull the good from it, and leave the rest behind as we move forward. So,
Definitely.
um, Rob, again, man, really appreciate you coming on and hanging out. Always a good time
I love it.
chatting with you. Best of luck in your upcoming races, man. Looking forward to that, and hopefully we'll have you on again sometime.
That sounds great, and keep doing what you're doing, because definitely our world and the men in our world need it.